Digital Resurrection: Jewish Perspectives on AI Simulations of the Deceased. The development of AI technology capable of simulating deceased individuals represents a significant challenge to traditional conceptions of death, memory, and mourning. Current technologies can generate conversational agents based on digital records, social media histories, and recorded interactions, creating increasingly sophisticated facsimiles of the deceased. These simulations range from text-based chatbots to more complex audio-visual representations that attempt to replicate personality traits, speech patterns, and mannerisms. The ethical implications of such technology extend beyond mere technical capabilities. The ability to interact with a simulation of a deceased loved one raises fundamental questions about the nature of human identity, the boundaries between life and death, and the psychological impact of prolonged engagement with digital representations of the dead. Unlike photographs or recordings, which serve as static memories, these interactive simulations create the illusion of ongoing presence and relationship, challenging traditional processes of grief and acceptance. Judaism approaches death not as an absolute endpoint but as a transition that affects both the deceased and the living. The Jewish understanding of memory is particularly nuanced, emphasizing active engagement rather than passive recollection. This conception of memory as a dynamic process is evident in the Hebrew word zakah, which implies not merely remembering but acting upon memory. Traditional Jewish practices around death and remembrance reflect this active approach. The recitation of Kaddish, the observance of Yahrzeit, and the visiting of graves all serve not merely to recall the deceased but to maintain an ongoing relationship with their memory while acknowledging the reality of their passing. These practices have evolved over time, incorporating new technologies and customs while maintaining their essential purpose of honoring the dead and supporting the living through their grief. The Jewish tradition has long grappled with questions of appropriate engagement with the deceased. Biblical prohibitions against necromancy, obviadoni, reflect concerns about attempts to breach the boundary between life and death. However, the Talmudic tradition also demonstrates sophisticated methods of engaging with previous generations through scholarly dialogue and interpretation. The concept of speaking with the dead in Jewish tradition has typically been mediated through text study, ethical teachings, and the continuation of family traditions. The Talmud itself presents conversations across generations, weaving together the voices of scholars separated by centuries. This presents a model for engagement with the past that maintains clear boundaries while acknowledging the ongoing influence of the deceased on the living. Contemporary rabbinic authorities face unprecedented questions regarding the permissibility and parameters of AI simulations. While direct biblical prohibitions against necromancy may not technically apply to digital technologies, the underlying principles concerning respect for the dead, kavod hamet, and appropriate boundaries between life and death remain relevant. The Jewish legal tradition has historically demonstrated flexibility in adapting to new technologies while maintaining core values and principles. Relevant legal principles include not only those directly related to death and mourning but also broader considerations of human dignity and the preservation of memory. Previous rabbinic responses to technological innovations in mourning practices, such as photographs and video recordings, provide useful precedents for evaluating AI simulations. These responses generally emphasize maintaining the dignity of the deceased while acknowledging the legitimate emotional needs of mourners. Jewish mourning practices are designed to facilitate healthy grief while maintaining community support. The structured nature of Shiva, Shoshim, and the year of mourning provides a framework for gradually accepting loss while honoring the deceased. AI simulations potentially disrupt this careful balance by offering an apparent continuation of relationship that may impede acceptance of death. However, these technologies might serve valuable pastoral functions when properly integrated into existing frameworks. They could help preserve family histories, facilitate intergenerational connection, and provide comfort when used with appropriate guidance and limitations. The key lies in ensuring that such tools support rather than supplant traditional mourning practices and community involvement. Any framework for evaluating AI simulations must consider both technical capabilities and ethical implications. Proposed criteria should include accuracy of representation, potential for psychological harm, impact on traditional practices, and safeguards against misuse. Implementation guidelines should emphasize transparency about the artificial nature of the simulation, respect for the deceased's privacy and stated wishes, and integration with existing communal support structures. Specific recommendations include limiting initial access during acute grief periods, requiring rabbinic or psychological consultation before use, and establishing clear protocols for creation and use of simulations. These guidelines should be flexible enough to accommodate technological advancement while maintaining ethical boundaries and religious values. As AI technology continues to advance, religious communities must prepare for increasingly sophisticated simulations that blur the boundaries between memory and presence. The Jewish community faces particular challenges in maintaining traditional approaches to death and mourning while acknowledging the potential benefits of new technologies. The path forward requires careful balance between innovation and tradition. Religious leaders and communities should work to develop comprehensive policies that address both current and anticipated developments in AI simulation technology. These policies should emphasize the preservation of Jewish values and practices while acknowledging the legitimate emotional and psychological needs that drive interest in digital resurrection. Ultimately, the Jewish approach to AI simulations of the deceased must be grounded in traditional wisdom while remaining responsive to contemporary needs. Success will be measured not by technological sophistication but by our ability to honor both the dead and the living through thoughtful integration of new tools into ancient practices. The goal should be to enhance, rather than replace, the profound wisdom embedded in Jewish approaches to death, memory, and mourning. This challenge presents an opportunity for Jewish thought to demonstrate its continued relevance in addressing modern ethical dilemmas while maintaining its essential character and values. Through careful consideration and principled adaptation, the Jewish community can develop approaches to AI simulation technology that respect tradition while acknowledging the changing nature of human experience and need.